Roused by the crackle of static, a lingering sense of dread crawls across the floor. You sit alone in your room, a dimly lit memory repeats in your head. 17 demos, so horrible to describe, keep you from your bed. Each one is a personally crafted nightmare. You've tried to tell others, no one understands. A CRT you don't remember owning flashes to life. Frozen in place, you look upon the flickering screen to spy a dismal, bloodied scene. A cracked and faded jewel case sits close beside. A pale grey plastic box sits in front, emitting a low, whirring noise. Will you take to the controller, or let yourself be taken over? Horror is a tricky thing. We all have something we're scared of, and while some fears are universal, others are highly personal. It's difficult to talk about it without someone going, well, that doesn't seem very scary. Or, I was watching horror movies when I was 5 years old. I know horror. There are many types of horror. The kind that startles you, the kind that makes you unsettled, or the kind that makes you question yourself. Personally, I like to explore horror in all its facets and discover the emotions it makes me feel. The more scared I feel, the more alive I feel. The horror genre has always been a favorite, so it's natural that horror games would eventually become a fascination. The hows and the whys aren't very important, but after being disappointed by AAA horror for a while, I found this, the Haunted PS1 Demo Disc 2020, a collection of indie-developed demos in the horror genre, although I, personally, think it's much more accurate to call it a horror anthology. My goal with this video is partly to talk about the demos, but also of the thing as a whole. But first things first, 17 demos. Let's get to it. Let's start with an easy one to talk about, because there's not much to say other than it's broken. Nothing in this demo seemed to work correctly, and a cursory glance online suggests I'm not the only one who faced this issue. Shame. Whether it's the menus freezing, controls locking, or dialogue breaking, there's much wrong here. But the good news is that they've continued to develop the game, so if it seems even moderately interesting, check out the link in the description below and follow the progress / try a newer version of the demo yourself. I know I will. Oh yeah, I probably should have started by pointing out that links to all the projects can be found in the description of the video. After all, I'm also doing this to support the developers. Clear? Alright, back to Dread Delusions. I have a lot to say about Dread Delusions, but this is not the video for it. I've been aware of Dread Delusions for a long while now, even owned the early access version, and everything I'd seen before suggested it was going to be a brilliant game. I hadn't actually played it before though, so this was my first time trying it. And it was fantastic. The game absolutely oozes atmosphere and the plot had me hooked from the start. The graphics are sublime and the audio just stellar. This is the first and only time I'll play this until the full game is released, so expect a significantly longer video on that then. Sadly, another game I don't have a lot to say about, but for the wrongest of wrong reasons. The development has been cancelled. Because this was a game that stood out to me as well made and surprisingly well realized for just a demo. It ends abruptly, the plot careening off the cliff instead of hanging on to it, and knowing I'll never see the end makes me sad. Playing as a mouse in a tilted world, a warped reflection of our own, was fun and refreshing enough that I never questioned the linearity. It just felt like there was so much more to discover here. Pour one out for the ones we lost. Right, let's change gears here a bit and take a peek at games that aren't so much demos as they are short horror experience, like a short film or story. From this point on, I'll have a little more to say, I think. The first game on the disc that I played and kind of set the mood right out the gate. A dark, abandoned house where you, at first, merely walk in a very long corridor. Eventually, the titular beasts show up and you shoot at them with your gun at first and eventually a shotgun. Strange, but if you're an accurate enough shot, then go for it, I guess. Eventually you descend deeper into the house and things become weirder and weirder, as if descending deeper into a very twisted beehive of epic proportions. From a gameplay standpoint, it's alright, I guess. The gunplay is nothing to talk about, and the arena segments were awful. On easy, it was just too easy, and on hard, which I only went back to play after recording, it's practically impossible, at least for me. There's nothing complicated about the combat, just backtrack and unload as many bullets as quickly as you can into the swarm. Better yet is everything else. The graphics tickle my brain's pleasure center, and the audio is creepy and eerie, as it should be. I love the setting, and the ending I got left me feeling appropriately uncomfortable for a short experience. The game boasts about having at least 2 endings, but I could never figure out how to get the second ending. Gross, disgusting, horrific, filthy. Much like Killer Beast, Filthbreed is practically a walking simulator with a few very small detours to find ammo and some lore pages. There's combat here too, but it's mercifully brief and never really gets in the way. It's also the winner of the first jump scare that actually got me. But the game absolutely nails the atmosphere, and I genuinely felt like showering after finishing it. The last bit really made my skin crawl, and I couldn't wait to finish it. In a good way. Really got under my skin. Or perhaps under my tongue? It's slick, it's creepy, it really earns its title, and proves that you don't need a lot to be horror. It's like Condemned and Silent Hill had a disgusting, filthy offspring. Do you ever feel like you're dreaming, yet you seem awake, as if you're stuck somewhere in between the two states? Then perhaps you're playing Insomnio, a game all about dreaming. While it is a complete game on its own, it does feel more like a proof of concept. The environment's well made, but lacking something of a red thread. Or perhaps I just couldn't grasp it? Unless the point was to become unsettled, which the game managed quite well, it really found this awful middle ground, much like in a dream where you recognize where you are, and yet not at all. Like walking around in a city in the middle of the night, same place, but it feels so very different. The game is made up of brief gameplay segments where something happens to unsettle you. 4 and 5 were definitely the ones that made my flesh crawl the most. This didn't really feel like a horror to me. Outside of a brief exchange in the beginning, there's not much plot to this, and the environments themselves aren't creepy enough to make this game spooky. It does make an admirable attempt at the end to make the whole thing seem unsettling, but it just didn't work for me. Or perhaps I didn't play it long enough? The gameplay is pretty straightforward. Your goal is to light a number of candles scattered about the map. Once that is done, you're transported to the end, and then the game just starts over, repeating the dialogue of you just waking up. So, is it all an endless loop of lighting candles and waking up? I suppose that is kind of scary. What just happened? Playing this old-school adventure game with graphics and controls similar to the first Alone in the Dark games and take care of people in stasis? Virtual reality? Until they start dying one by one. Murdered, in fact. A mix between puzzle game and horror, you barely get your feet wet before the game, sadly, ends. I never really understood the puzzle aspect of the game and felt like I had failed at some point, forcing me down a certain road. It didn't feel good, I'll admit. The game left me with a lot of questions, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. Love the graphics, love the sounds, love the concept. More, please. Did you ever think to yourself, I love skating games, but I don't think there's enough horror in them? That is an oddly specific wish, but guess what? This game has you more or less covered. Don't get too excited though, it's not what I would call a very complex skating game. There's grinding in the game, but I never really got it to work, which was unfortunate. Felt like an important part of a skating game. But nonetheless, I was fascinated by the game, thinking, I wonder if there's something more here, and kept skating on. The first time I hit the border, I nearly jumped out of my skin. There's something incredibly hypnotic about the sound of your skateboard on the pavement. And again, there's that whole city at night theme that keeps popping up throughout this collection. Whatever the case, I loved my time with it, and part of me wishes this was made into a full-fledged game. Now it's time to go from short stories to actual demos, meaning that it's just a small part or a vertical slice of a much bigger game. It's a place of legend, this library. You can see it in your dreams and then you mercifully wake up. That's all it's supposed to be, a dream place. But you actually found it. Or did it find you? This game can be best summed up as a first-person adventure game. You're dumped unceremoniously into a library and pretty much expected to figure things out from there. It's not a very difficult nor long game unless you're like me and miss a vital part of the puzzle right at the beginning. I ended up having to play this game twice because of a recording snafu, but I never regretted it the slightest. The atmosphere is phenomenal and the sound really gets to you. The best news is that the full game is free on Steam now, so you just go there and check it out. I couldn't even begin to say that name and not worry about getting it wrong. Fatum Betula? Fatum Betula? Fetum Betula. However you prefer your Latin to be pronounced, if I'm not entirely wrong, it translates to Destiny Birch, which is very fitting in this dream-inspired game. Don't play this game if you expect a game that holds your hand. It's an adventure game with a focus on experimentation and expect you to play it over and over again. The goal is simply to find different liquids to water the tree with, and depending on your choices you get different endings. Some are easy to get the fishing rod, catch a fish, feed the cat, get the oil, ta-da! But I suspect some of them are gonna require longer and more complicated solutions. In the demo alone you get several endings, and that's with the whole area locked off. Just imagine what you could do with that. Fair warnings though, the game's graphics get absolutely mental at some points, and can trigger both nausea and headaches if you're not careful. Still, one of the few games already available on Steam, go check it out if it sounds interesting. This is a game that I wanted to love, but struggled to actually do so. While it is a demo, it feels more like a vertical slice, picking certain pieces from the whole game to give a broader explanation of what you're in for in the full game. It starts off great, first impressions were fantastic, but quickly starts to skip a bit. It made me feel like I was listening to a song where parts were missing, or parts from other songs had been randomly stitched into it. Perhaps that was the whole idea. Perhaps I'm just stupid. Graphics were great, sounds were fantastic, and the idea underneath it all is something that genuinely excited me. I'm keeping my eye on this, cause it made me wonder if it was all purposeful or just to give us a bigger taste of what's to come. If nothing else, I want to see how it all continues. If you, like me, spent some of your formative teenage years in front of Resident Evil and Silent Hill and now think, man, those games were great, I sure wish somebody would make another one like that, then I've got you covered. This game is a lot that, but with no combat, in this demo anyway. My biggest complaint is simply that I didn't get what the game was trying to say, and only made sense if you read about the game online. It did try a lot for just a simple demo, trying to open up the world just a little, but the puzzles came across as far too simplistic, and while there was a feeling of oppression, horror never really emerged until at the very end, and even then, just barely. But the good news is that there's a much newer demo available, so I recommend checking that out instead. Look, did you ever play LSD Dream Emulator? I did, and I hated it. That's just one beloved retro game that I can't really get into. I'm glad for everyone who loved it and still find it good today, but me? Nah. But hey, some more good news for you. If you like Dream Emulator, then you'll love this game. It's pretty much just that, plus cats. Lots and lots of cats. I'll be honest though, I didn't play this game much. It just wasn't for me. It looks good and the controls worked, but I guess I just never got it. This is for all the people out there who just needed LSD with cats in it, I guess. It's either this game or Dread Delusions that can be counted as the most well-known game on this disc. I won't spend too much time on this. It's a retro FPS with Quake movement. The Quake jump was a nice little touch, with a very grungy design. I like it in theory, but this particular version felt empty and almost tech demo-y. The best description I can give is if Quake and Unreal had a love child, it'd be this. But it's been under constant development since, so it'll be interesting to see what has stayed the same and what will have changed. That's really all I have to say about Effigy at this point. I'm sure it'll have lots more to say once the full version is out. Short, cute, and not very challenging. My first playthrough of this game lasted less than 2 minutes and barely saw the enemy. I had to go and play it again and intentionally get caught by the enemy just so I could see how the game works then. Once you finish the game, you get an absurdly long credit scene for such a short game, then boot it out. But the game has had more development since, so I guess I'll have to go and play a newer demo to really get a feel for the game. We end on something that really tickled my fancy. A game about Finland. More specifically, a game about a Finnish man just trying to enjoy an evening in the sauna when all hell breaks loose. Literally, I think? I got pretty far in heating the sauna before the game decided to send Satan after me and devolve into weirdness, but I enjoyed my time with it. Since then, the game had a successful campaign on Kickstarter and has gotten a pretty significant touch-up and expanded development, so the game really does promise to be something entirely special and its own. If nothing else, I really enjoyed listening to the finish. In summary, the Haunted PS1 Demo Disc 2020 was everything. Right, sorry, I lied. There's not 17 demos on this, but actually 18, and I feel this is the perfect game to end on since it encapsulates so much of what was attempted here on this disc. Midnight Spaces is all about those little moments in the middle of the night when the city is asleep and feels alien. Whether it's a walk to the toilet or a smoke in your backyard, it just feels different. The game, as far as I know, has no failure state, and how long it takes you is entirely dependent on your own playing. Was it scary? No. Unsettling? A massive yes. Right, and that really is the end of the demo disc. It's safe to say that it was everything I wanted it to be, and more. My expectations were low going in, unsure of what I was in for. Was it gonna be in the vein of the DreadX collection, or were they going to be actual demos? Turns out it was a little bit of both. The concept of horror was broadly interpreted and translated into game form, offering a wide variety and surely something that'll hit the spot for almost everyone. Of course, one of the immediate obstacles is whether you can accept, enjoy, or even love the low poly graphics and simulated low resolutions. As someone who spent a lot of time on the very first PlayStation, it felt like traveling back in time to a point where I let myself be scared more easily. I don't know if they were given specific themes to explore or these are just universal things that fascinate us, but it feels like themes such as dreaming, night, and the city were on the minds of quite a few. Others had their own ideas, and it's important to remember that just because you don't find something scary doesn't mean others won't. Even the games that didn't work for me still had something to offer and made me think, interesting, which is the whole point. Horror anthology is nothing new after all, and I really do appreciate that the concept has become a thing in the gaming community the last few years. If nothing else, it's a very good opportunity for developers and designers to flex their brains and stretch their wings. What really ties the whole thing together is the presentation. Presenting it like a demo disc was inspired and really aimed at people, well, my age I suppose. So perhaps it works better for me than many others. Unlike a game jam, which we'll be covering eventually, this was a curated collection which really does heighten the experience. Perhaps your curiosity has been piqued, or perhaps you feel unsatisfied by my run-through of the games. Well, the good news is that the Haunted PS1 Demo Disc is still available for free, and I'll be leaving the link in the description. Even better then is the fact that this was the 2020 version, and there's been 3 more discs since, not to mention several other very interesting projects from the same community. So get out there and find yourself your very own demo disc.